People are interested in some criminal cases not only because of how shockingly violent the crimes are, but also because of how horrifyingly complicated things are behind the scenes. The mysterious disappearance of a young woman, the sick deception of a famous con artist, and the brutal killing of a family that seemed normal are the three cases that this documentary goes into more detail. Every one of these cases has left an indelible mark on our collective mind. Please hold on tight, because we are about to go deep into these scary events and look into the dark truths that many people have tried to hide. In a remote part of Lancaster, California, on June 20th, 2018, something unbelievable happened. The lives of everyone involved were about to change forever because of a dark and strange turn that was about to happen on a pretty normal day. Anthony Avalos, a 10-year-old boy, was brutally killed by the people who were supposed to protect him. His death was caused by his mother and her boyfriend. Anthony died in a shocking and senseless way after being abused for years. It became one of the most disturbing cases in California's recent history. At first, it was a sad story about a child's pain, but it quickly turned into a terrifying account of how a young boy's life was taken in the cruelest way possible, while people who could have helped him did nothing. Once people knew something was really wrong, it was too late for anyone to do anything about it. As the police put together the sad story, they couldn't believe that such cruelty had gone unnoticed for so long. Anthony Avalos was 10 years old and full of life and potential, just like every other boy his age. He had goals, hopes, and the knowledge that he had a future ahead of him. Being friendly and open to others was something he was known for at Tierra Bonita Elementary School in Lancaster, California, where he went to school. His teachers loved how happy and upbeat he was, and everyone in his class loved him for it. But when he hid his life from other people, it was anything but normal, because his mother, Heather Maxine Barron, and her boyfriend, Kareem Leva, were seeing each other. They abused him in horrible ways while he was at home. Tony's family has been through a lot of pain and tragedy over the years. Heather Barron, his mother, had been in abusive relationships in the past, and there were many red flags in her past. There was worry about her reputation. While Barron was dating Leva, there were several violent incidents, which made the relationship very unhealthy. From the start, it was very clear that Barron was losing a lot of her ability to give her kids a safe and loving home. Anthony's siblings were also abused while they were growing up. Just like Anthony, Anthony's two brothers and one sister saw him being abused in a horrible way, but no one did anything to stop it. No one knows why. Over time, it became clearer that Anthony had been physically and emotionally abused, but the people closest to him did nothing to report it or help in any meaningful way. The pain Anthony was in kept getting worse behind closed doors as the days turned into weeks and then into months. Even though he was severely beaten, forced to go without food, and ignored, he stayed positive and held on to the hope that things would get better in the long run. However, the situation kept getting worse despite his best efforts. Anthony's cries for help were ignored many times when he tried to get help. The terrible end of Anthony's nightmare happened on June 20th. 2018, just a few weeks before his 11th birthday. It got so bad that no one could have imagined it would get that bad. Reports say that Anthony was severely beaten by his mother and her boyfriend. He got kicked, punched, and whipped with a belt. But the worst wasn't over yet. Anthony was badly hurt in the beating and is in critical condition. He has burns, cuts, and bruises all over his body. He was left in a very bad way. Heather Barron and Kareem Leva made a panic call to 911 around 1 p.m. They said Anthony had slipped and hurt himself on the stairs. But it was clear to the paramedics right away that the boy had been hurt in a lot more ways than just falling when they got there. Even though it was clear that he had been abused, he was not responding, even though the medical staff tried hard. It was clear that Anthony had been badly beaten, tortured, and ignored, even though he was taken to the hospital right away. It was clear that no one had paid attention to him because his wounds were so bad. He was on life support while he was in the hospital. The medical professionals who were taking care of him were shocked and horrified when they saw how badly his body had been hurt. After only a few hours at the hospital, Anthony's injuries were too bad for him to recover from, and he was pronounced dead. The medical examiner further looked into Anthony's death and found that it was caused by blunt force trauma, which is consistent with long-term physical abuse. After Anthony died, the police began looking into what happened. The information they gave out was nothing less than deeply upsetting. While they were being questioned, Barron and Leva gave different versions of what had happened. They said Anthony had fallen down the stairs, but the evidence didn't support their story. There were deep bruises, burns, and marks all over the body from being restrained that made the abuse very clear. The investigators found out that Anthony had been abused for a number of years after asking more questions about his life. On more than one occasion, his mother and her boyfriend hurt him physically and mentally. The thing had happened to him more than once. It's impossible to describe how brutal Anthony was being because of the abuse, which had gotten to a very bad point. He had been punched, kicked, burned with cigarettes, and even forced to kneel for long periods of time during the attack. During the investigation, it was found that Anthony had tried to get help before, but his pleas were turned down. It was clear that abuse was happening. But the teachers, social workers, and family members who were supposed to step in did not. Anthony's teacher said that he came to school with cuts and bruises, but no one did anything about it. Even though his classmates remembered him as a happy and caring kid, they had no idea the horrible things that happened to him as a child. It was shocking news that Anthony had even been forced to admit to crimes he hadn't really done. Barron and Leva threatened to punish him if he didn't confess to things he had never done before. Anthony had suffered terrible emotional wounds, and the trauma he had been through was hard to understand. The untimely death of Anthony Avalos was not an isolated event. In fact, it was quite the opposite. A bigger pattern of abuse and neglect had been going on in his family for a number of years. This was one of the reasons. Although Barron's past was full of red flags, people who should have been able to help, like social workers, teachers, and police, failed to see the signs of abuse. In the months before Anthony's death, many claims of abuse and neglect were made public. Even though social workers went to the house more than once, they didn't do anything about what they saw. Although there was a lot of proof that the family had a history of abuse and neglect, no one did what they needed to do to stop the abuse before it was too late. Anthony's death was a sad example of how the system doesn't protect kids who are already at a very vulnerable age. It cost the life of a child who hadn't done anything wrong, but his case served as a wake-up call for lawmakers and groups that work to protect kids. Barron and Leva were arrested and charged with murder and child abuse after the terrible events that led to Anthony's death. The case caused anger that spread across the country, with many people wondering how such a horrible crime could have been allowed to happen. There was a long trial, and both of the defendants were found guilty of murder in the first degree. Heather Barron was given a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole in November 2019, and Kareem Leva was also given a life sentence. Both people were found guilty in November 2019. Anthony Avalos was a young boy whose life was taken in the worst way possible, leaving his family to mourn. People were very upset about Anthony Avalos' death, and they want changes to be made to how cases of child abuse and neglect are handled. Anthony Avalos' case became a sign of how badly child protection systems don't work. People thought that Anthony's death would be a wake-up call to stop similar tragedies from happening again. In the hopes that this would work, lawmakers and advocacy groups worked to make sure that children were better protected. Anthony died many years ago, and since then, his family and the people of Lancaster have worked hard to honor his memory and bring attention to the problem of child abuse. Groups working to help children have been successful in making child protection laws stronger and giving social workers more tools so that kids like Anthony don't have to suffer alone. Anthony's story is sad, but it has helped start a movement to keep kids from being bullied or neglected. His life and death have made all of us want to do more to protect and love children. When we think about Anthony Avalos' life, we remember how important it is to be careful and kind. We are all responsible for protecting the weakest people in our society and making sure that no child has to go through the kind of pain that Anthony did. Two ways that his legacy will live on are through the fight for justice and the hearts of those who continue to fight for the safety of children all over the world. There have been many terrible things happen in California recently, but the case of Anthony Avalos is one of the most heartbreaking. It's scary because it's a chilling reminder of how dangerous it is to leave kids with people who are supposed to protect them. Even though it's a sad story, it shows how badly things need to change, how much more people need to know, and how every child, everywhere needs to be protected. Jayme Closs, a brave young girl who went through unbearable hardships and managed to get away from her captor, was taken hostage. And this story is about how she did it. If you don't know much about this case, don't worry. We'll go over all the details one by one. Jayme Closs's whole life turned upside down when she was only 13 years old. In the small Wisconsin town of Barron on the evening of October 15th, 2018, something terrible happened. The parents of Jayme, James and Denise Closs, were brutally killed, and Jayme was taken from her home and taken away from her residence. In the 88 days that followed, terrible things happened that shocked the whole country and also showed how brave and strong a young girl was who was determined to live. Let's get to work. First, let's say that Jayme Closs is a person. James and Denise Seals had a daughter named Jayme Closs in 2005. The family lived in the small Wisconsin town of Barron, which is known for having a close-knit city. Jayme was a happy, sure of herself, and friendly young woman. She loved to dance and hang out with her friends. People were drawn to her because of their smiles, which could make any room feel better. Both of her parents worked at a turkey processing plant in the area, and life for the Closs family was simple and quiet. Barron was a quiet town where everyone knew each other's names and crime wasn't common. For a teenager, Jayme's school life was pretty normal. Her friends liked her. She did activities outside of school, and she liked hanging out with her friends after school. This girl was only 13 years old and lived in a small town. Her everyday life was pretty normal. Still, we all know that things can change in an instant. That day came for Jayme and her family on October 15th, 2018, when they were all together. The nightmare began very early in the morning, when it was still very dark. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, a man named Jake Patterson showed up at the Closs family's house. Patterson lived in Gordon, Wisconsin, which is about 70 miles away from Barron, when he was 21 years old. After seeing Jayme get off a school bus at some point, he decided that she would be his target for some reason that I can't understand. Patterson's plan was cold and methodical in how it was carried out. He shaved his head and carefully chose the evening of his attack to make sure he didn't leave any forensic evidence behind. Patterson broke into the Closs family's house with a shotgun. James Closs, who was Jayme's dad, was the first person to be killed. The moment James heard a knock on the door, he went to see who it was, but Patterson shot him through the door, which was a surprise. Denise Closs and Jayme were trying to hide in the bathroom between other people. After Patterson broke down the bathroom door, found them, and arrested them, Denise had to tape Jayme's hands and mouth. Patterson ended up shooting Denise as well as her daughter, no matter how hard she tried to protect her. Jayme's parents disappeared in a matter of minutes, and she was taken by a man she had never seen before. The details of that night make me feel uneasy. Patterson made sure that nothing was left to chance. He had carefully planned his attack and even brought some things with him to make sure he could stay in charge. Jayme was taken by him, and he put her in the trunk of his car before driving off late at night. Jayme couldn't believe that she would be captured by someone she didn't know and that her parents would be killed in such a cruel way. After putting Jayme in the trunk of his car, Patterson drove to his remote cabin in Gordon, Wisconsin with her. Jayme was scared, confused, and sad because the trip took about 2 hours. She was still mourning the death of her parents. The moment they got to the cabin, Patterson forced Jayme to go into a tiny room that had been built under his bed. He put weights and boxes around her to keep her from getting out and keep her trapped inside. It was 58 days that Jayme was locked up in that cabin. Patterson was in charge of every part of her life. Under no circumstances did he let her leave the house, talk to other people, or even make a noise. Someone would have had a hard time finding her because the cabin was in the middle of nowhere and surrounded by trees. While she was being held captive, it was very scary for her Patterson tried to show her that he was in charge by creating an atmosphere of fear and control. He would threaten her and make it very clear that if she tried to run away, she would face terrible consequences no matter what. Even after all of this, Jayme never gave up hope. While she waited for the right time to act, she didn't let her strength waver. Now, let's talk about the investigation that was done. When police went to Closs's house in the early hours of October 15th, they found a horrifying scene. Both James and Denise Closs had died, and Jayme hadn't been seen in a long time. There were no immediate clues about who had done the crime or where Jayme was. She was found thanks to the hard work of both the local community and the police. Publications called Amber Alerts were put up, and people volunteered to search the areas around the location. They kept looking for Jayme for weeks and months, but they could not find her. The investigation was made even harder by the fact that the crime seemed to have no clear cause. Patterson did not know the Closs family personally, and there did not seem to be any links between them. There was no clear reason for the violent act, which made it harder for investigators to figure out what happened between the two events. Barron's community had lost all of its resources. As a way to show support for the search for Jayme, people got together and held up signs. Her classmates and teachers at school couldn't understand how something so terrible could happen to someone they knew and cared about. What they heard had a huge effect on them. Jayme's story wasn't over yet. Following almost 3 months of being locked up, Jayme saw a chance to escape on January 10th, 2019. After being held captive, Patterson left the cabin, and she realized for the first time that she was all by herself, and no one was there to keep her safe. After getting stuck under some boxes and weights, Jayme pushed them away and ran outside into the cold. She used all of her courage to get out of the situation where she was trapped. She eventually found Jean Nutter, a woman walking her dog. After getting lost in the snowy woods for a while, the moment Jean saw Jayme on the news, she knew who she was and took her right away to a neighbor's house, where they called 911. When the 911 operator asked for more information, Jayme bravely identified herself and told what happened after the incident. Later, Jean Nutter called Jayme an incredibly brave person, saying that even though she had been through a lot, she stayed calm and determined. Within minutes, police arrived to make sure Jayme was safe. The neighbors who helped her called the police to report what happened. Not long after Jayme got away, Patterson was caught and taken into custody. The police stopped him and questioned him while he was driving around the neighborhood, probably looking for Jayme. Patterson told the police everything that happened while they were questioning him. He admitted that he was the one who kidnapped Jayme, killed her parents, and put her in jail. He gave an incredibly clear reason for what he did. He wanted to take Jayme and didn't care what it took to get her. He didn't show any regret for what he did. The legal process began right away. Patterson made up his mind when he was given a life sentence without the chance of parole in May 2019. As for Patterson's actions, the judge said they were beyond comprehension and that Patterson should get the harshest punishment possible. However, even though justice was done, Jayme could never get back the pain and loss she had gone through. Without a doubt, Jayme's story is one of bravery and strength. Even with everything she had to go through, she found the strength to escape and get her life back. Her bravery moved people all over the country, and she brought attention to how important it is to help people who have been through traumatic events. We are reminded that there is hope even in the worst of times because of how brave Jayme was. Ever since Jayme was able to get away, her community and extended family have been there for her with love and support. She worked hard to get better, and now she is focusing on taking her life back one step at a time. People and groups from all over the country have reached out to offer their help because her story touched so many people's hearts. We should all remember that we need to be extra careful to protect each other if there is one thing we can learn from this story. Jayme was able to escape because she saw a chance, and people in her community were ready to help her. A reminder that what we do, no matter how small it seems, can have a big effect on someone else's life. This case revolves around the unfortunate passing of Blaze Bernstein, a young man who was exceptionally bright and talented, whose life was cut painfully short. The nation was profoundly shaken by this case. which sparked discussions about hate crimes, mental health, and the administration of justice. In the event that you are not familiar with this narrative, there is no need to worry because we are going to meticulously go over all of the specifics. With only 19 years of life under his belt, Blaise Bernstein was brutally taken from this world. In addition to being a college student with a promising future ahead of him, Blaise was brimming with potential and promise. Not only did his murder completely destroy his family and friends, but it also left an indelible mark not only on the community, but also on the world at large. The chilling details surrounding his death and the reason for his death are what make this case even more terrifying than it already should have been. So, let's get down to business. On April 27th, 1998, Blaise Bernstein was welcomed into the world by his parents, Gideon and Jayme Bernstein. He was the oldest of 3 siblings and spent his childhood in Orange County, Texas, in the United States. Blaise had a reputation for having an alluring smile, a friendly personality, and an extraordinary level of intelligence. Writing, cooking, and spending time with his family and friends were all activities that he enjoyed passionately. He was a creative soul. During his time at the illustrious Orange County School of the Arts, Blaise demonstrated exceptional talent in the field of creative writing. His instructors and classmates frequently referred to him as a shining example, someone who made others feel as though they were seen and valued. Following the completion of his high school education, Blaise continued his education at the University of Pennsylvania, where he was pursuing a degree in psychology with the intention of pursuing a career in medicine. His goal was to be of assistance to others and to bring about positive change in the world. Members of Blaise's family and friends frequently remarked on his boundless energy and his enthusiasm for life. He was able to make everyone around him feel like they were a part of something special, and his future appeared to be boundless. Nevertheless, Blaise's life was sadly cut short in January of 2018, when he went back to Orange County for the winter break. It was supposed to be a happy occasion to get together with family and friends, but instead it turned out to be a nightmare that nobody could have possibly anticipated. Beginning on January 2nd, 2018, the sequence of events that led up to Blaise's murder began. In the evening of that day, Blaise re-established contact with Samuel Woodward, a former classmate of his from high school. Both Woodward and Blaise had a passing familiarity with one another during their time at school. However, they did not have a particularly close relationship. With the help of social media, Blaise was able to get in touch with Woodward, and the two of them made the decision to get together that evening. Although Blaise informed his parents that he was going to meet a friend, he did not provide a lot of information about his plans. According to the findings of the investigation, Blaise and Woodward traveled to Borrego Park in Lake Forest, which is a peaceful suburban neighborhood located closer to Blaise's residence. Following that, what transpired is a terrifying and tragic event. In a later statement, Woodward asserted that Blaise had attempted to kiss him, which resulted in a disagreement. On the other hand, the authorities discovered evidence that suggested Woodward could have planned his actions in advance. Woodward, who was affiliated with a violent neo-Nazi group, held ideologies that were extremely unsettling. According to the findings of the investigation, the fact that Blaise was not shy about discussing his sexual orientation may have played a role in Woodward's decision to commit this heinous act. The following day, when Blaise's family was unable to get in touch with him, the disappearance of Blaise was reported. It was immediately apparent to his parents that something was wrong. Blaise was not the type of person who would disappear without a trace, and this was especially true over the course of his winter break. Blaise Bernstein was the subject of a massive search effort that was initiated by the Bernstein family, along with friends and volunteers, with the community coming together to support the search. Social media was flooded with posts asking for information, and the community rallied together. After several days of searching, there were no significant leads found. The Bernstein family clung to one's optimism and refused to accept the worst possible outcome. On the other hand, their worst fears were realized on January 9th, 2018, when the body of Blaise was found in a shallow grave close to Borrego Park, an act of violence that was both brutal and senseless. He had been stabbed more than 20 times, and it had left everyone who knew Blaze in a state of shock. Almost immediately, Samuel Woodward was identified as a possible suspect in the investigation. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to provide an adequate explanation for the evidence that was piling up against him, which included scratches on his hands and dirt under his fingernails. The fact that Woodward's accounts were inconsistent when questioned by authorities added to the suspicions that were already present. In addition, the investigators discovered digital evidence that indicated Woodward's involvement in the events. Messages that were sent back and forth between Blaze and Woodward on social media revealed that the two individuals had intended to meet on the evening that Blaze vanished. According to the data from Woodward's cell phone and surveillance footage, he was present at the park where Blaze's body was discovered. These pieces of evidence painted a picture that was extremely damning. The revelations that Woodward had connections to extremist ideologies were what made this case even more disturbing than it already was. According to the findings of the investigation, Woodward had been affiliated with the Waffen Division, a neo-Nazi organization that is notorious for its violent rhetoric and methods of operation. It was found that Woodward's private communications and social media profiles contained content that glorified violence and contained messages that were hateful. An already heartbreaking case was further complicated by the discovery of this additional layer of horror. During the time that the community was struggling to come to terms with Blaze's passing, his family became vocal advocates for equality and justice. Rather than allowing their sorrow to consume them, Gideon and Jayme Bernstein chose to take action by speaking out about the perils of hatred and the significance of acceptance. They decided to establish the Blaze Bernstein Memorial Fund in order to pay tribute to their son's legacy and honor causes that were near and dear to his heart, such as the rights of LGBTQ+ individuals and the awareness of mental health issues. The tale of Blaze was heard far beyond the confines of Orange County. People from all walks of life came together to remember a young man whose life was cut tragically short. Vigils and memorials were held all over the country to honor the memory of the young man. The murder of Blaze sparked significant conversations about hate crimes, extremism, and the fundamental requirement for society to have a greater capacity for understanding and compassion. Soon after Samuel Woodward was taken into custody, the legal proceedings against him were initiated. An additional charge of first-degree murder was added to his charge because he was also charged with committing a hate crime. The prosecution argued that Woodward's actions were motivated by his hatred toward Blaze's sexual orientation and that the murder was premeditated. They also claimed that Woodward had committed the criminal act. In the meantime, Woodward's legal team asserted that the criminal act was not premeditated and that he suffered from mental health issues. The case received a great deal of attention from the media, and many people followed every new development with great interest. Family members of Blaze went to court hearings because they were adamant about seeing that their son received justice. In spite of the fact that the legal process has been drawn out, the evidence against Woodward continues to be significant. According to the current situation, he is currently awaiting trial, and Blaze's family is continuing to fight for justice and the lasting impact of their cherished son. In spite of the profound grief that he suffered, Blaze Bernstein's story is one of perseverance and expectation. Over the course of his life, he experienced love, creativity, and the hope that the future would be bright. Despite the fact that Blaze's time on Earth was much too brief, his influence is still being felt by those who were fortunate enough to have known him, as well as by the countless others whose lives have been altered by his story. In their frequent conversations, Blaze's parents emphasize the significance of being kind and accepting, and they encourage others to honor their son's memory by taking a stand against hatred and embracing love. They hope that through their advocacy and the work of the Blaze Bernstein Memorial Fund, they will be able to create a world in which horrific events such as the murder of Blaze Bernstein will become a thing of the past. In the event that there is only one thing that can be learned from this narrative, it is the significance of the power of community and the necessity of standing together in the face of hatred. Despite the fact that Blaze's life was taken from him, his spirit continues to live on in the innumerable acts of love and kindness that are inspired by his memory. Despite the fact that it is a challenging one, It serves as a reminder of the power that can be found in the power of unity and compassion. As we've seen, these cases serve to remind us of the scary truth that darkness often hides itself in plain sight. The real story always comes out. Whether it's a mystery that hasn't been solved, a planned crime, or a betrayal that no one saw coming. This is the kind of story that makes us think about what trust is, how strong secrets are, and what justice is. Everyone is always looking for the truth, and for those brave enough to find it, the price is often higher than they thought it would be. This documentary was interesting. Please like it, subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you thought in the comment section below. Your help makes it possible for us to tell more stories like this one.